Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, guys. Welcome to the first episode of the Psychology Podcast. My name is Rachel and I'll be the host. And this is
Rachel. Hi, my name's Rachel Curran.
okay. So I guess we could say something about yourself, just so we can get to know you as a person, your interests, hobbies, where you do research, where you attend school, things like that.
Perfect. So I'm an undergraduate student. I'm currently between majors. I began my undergraduate degree as a health education, health promotion major. And now I'm hoping to graduate with a degree in women and gender studies and a minor in psychology. I'm from Southern California. I live here right now. And yeah, I'm in the process of transferring schools, but one of something that I'm really into right now is doing research. And so that's been a big part of, I guess, my life at the moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. What school do you do research for?
I do research at Harvard University in the Embodied Social Cognition Lab under the psychology department. So it's been really fun.
Amazing. Okay, so I guess since this is the first episode, I'm totally happy to introduce myself. I'm a senior that goes to Garland High School. It's a small school in Dallas. I'm a huge fanatic about learning about psychology and its intersections with sociology specifically, and my concentration is in relation to gender studies and African American studies. I'm super excited to be hosting this podcast. We're just going to go over a bunch of super useful ways of understanding psychology from a clinical and social perspective, and keeping it within a super interesting format so everyone can stay as engaged as possible. So I think we should go ahead and kick this off. I'm super excited. I would say the first thing I have to ask you is that oftentimes the way women carry themselves or their posture creates a first impression before they even open their mouth. Dr. Nicole Knoll, in the course Psychology of the Gendered Body at Harvard University, which I believe you've taken, often examines the role posture plays in the way that women are perceived. So how does posture change the way women are perceived? And I suppose as a follow-up question, what stances are perceived to be more feminine versus masculine?
Yeah, so I think it plays a large role when we think about masculine versus feminine postures. A masculine posture would definitely be one that's very dominant and powerful. So if we think of this in a standing position, probably very upright, and the arms would probably be away from the body. Kind of think about it like taking up space. And also probably feet wider. So yeah, just taking up a lot of space, I would say, to sum up postures that are more masculine, and also in seated positions, like a figure four seated position is something that we see a lot in more stereotypically masculine postures. And then also again, legs apart when you're seated is also a more masculine posture. For feminine postures, I would say very arms are more close to the body, like the exact opposite. So arms close to the body. If you are seated, your legs are probably closer together. So yeah, probably taking up as little space as possible. But yeah, I think it has a huge impact on the way individuals are perceived. It can definitely be it can show it nonverbal communication is one of the biggest ways we communicate. So yeah.
So I think I'm kind of fascinated by that idea because it seems like even society has catered itself to these specific preferences and how a specific gender should carry themselves in terms of posture. For example, etiquette for women oftentimes have your legs crossed, and your hands in your lap close to your body. And in a way, it kind of speaks to, I think, how social psychology can explain even just everyday activities we kind of perceive to be normal. I guess this is somewhat tangentially related to that previous question about posture, but what about things like gestures? What are the significance of gestures in some social relations, and how can it masculinize or feminize a person?
Yeah, so I would say some of the ones that come to my mind first are facial expressions. So in usually typically masculine facial expressions, we wouldn't see as much facial expression. I feel like females are definitely more socialized to show more expression, more emotion, when they are just talking, even in just everyday conversations. And so I would like, I think like one kind of like thing that is interesting is we would probably see anger being something that would be an expression that females wouldn't want to show, or wouldn't be, not stereotypically that something that we would want, that is like a norm. So males are more likely to show anger, and it's more socially acceptable for them to show anger. And then also eye contact, like a more masculine gesture in regards to eye contact would probably be like more of a stare, as opposed to like a more feminine gesture would be probably looking down, or studies have shown like females are more likely to look in like a dyad. And so, yeah, there's, and it kind of goes back to the same thing with the posture, where it's males are masculine postures, masculine gestures are more likely to be powerful and dominant, and female feminine postures and gestures are more likely to be submissive and yeah, like subordinate. Yeah.
Right. I think that when we think about gender and posture and its relation to how you perceive someone, it to
Mhm.
me almost sometimes begs the question of like why we so concretely assume that someone is either masculine or feminine through either their gender or their posture or their gestures. So I'm wondering,
Mhm.
like, what are your thoughts on is it possible to break down these barriers or stereotypes, or is it something that is simply like just integral to people as a result of society and the way that information or ideas just kind of permeate?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I would never like, I think it can be helpful to like be aware of maybe how, if like that's something that maybe bugs you, of how you act in certain social situations. Um I think that if it feels natural to, I don't know, like sit with your legs crossed, or stand a certain way, I wouldn't say like, oh, go change that. But if it is something that is something that you want to change, and you like just, I guess, kind of be aware in certain situations where you maybe feel like those postures definitely come out the most. I think it's also great for everyone to like learn about this and know about it, because yes, power postures that are powerful and dominant are great, but also like we don't all, in every situation, masculine postures don't have to be something that is necessary. Yeah, I could better a society maybe if we are taking, thing like,
Yeah, right. I think taking the initiative to examine our
yeah,
own biases. I think that is
yeah.
very useful because I mean I've even seen studies articulate that like whenever a woman is applying for a job, the way that she sits in her chair as she's being interviewed, or like the color she wears, like if she were to wear red, it would put off a wrong impression. Things like this kind of rub off the interviewee in a strange way, but these
Mhm.
same levels of like rigid assumptions that are kind of preconceived before anyone has a chance to prove themselves, specifically in reference to women here, don't also seem to be applied to men. So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that gender obviously has a strong construct that has influenced, I think, not only social relations but political relations for centuries now. How has history sutured and kind of sustained our understandings of these kind of cues, social cues, and the role that women play in society? And are these specific ideas intrinsic to cultures, or these things that have been shaped over centuries just based on normal human actions? Or I guess enlighten me on how you believe gender studies kind of plays into this aspect of social psychology.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there's so many ways you can look at it. I think it's something that obviously we see every day, like through just everyday interactions with people. Not even just with like interactions, people just like advertisements. It's something that is always around us, and kind of always available for us to see. I think it's interesting to think about like how social media has impacted this as well. If we think about like in the context of this conversation, with like masculine postures and gestures being more dominant and feminine being more submissive. If we think about that in like advertisements and something like as a woman going through the world, you see that in your daily life. It's interesting to think about how maybe that has shifted over the past like 20 years with like the rise of social media, and how content creators maybe are like, because a lot of the ads nowadays are done through content creators. How have they shifted that? That's actually an area of research I'm interested in looking at. And I'd love to hear your take on that, if that's, if you think there may have been like, if that's a shift that's happened.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up because I think the rise in, globalization and the rise of technology has kind of created a unique situation for social psychologists since like there's this totally new way that information is spread and distributed among the population. And obviously, I think so many teenagers, especially high schoolers, are major fans of like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, things like that. And I think just as they may do some bad things, for example, they've like reinforced certain body images and stereotypes that make, especially younger children, specifically like younger girls, have very insecure um, images of how they kind of view themselves. But I do think that social media has actually been very, in a way, helpful for the way that we spread awareness about certain things we may be doing that are, misogynistic or sexist,
Mhm.
because it's somewhat of a hypocrisy to assume that a woman might be more, rude or upfront just because she sets boundaries or sits a certain way. And I've definitely
Mhm.
seen a huge rise of people doing kind of what we're doing now, where high schoolers are taking advantage of actually researching social psychology or looking into aspects of psychology or sociology or really anything to spread that information. So, I mean, of course, I love to chat about that research if you do ever get to it, because that is obviously very interesting. But I think one thing I also kind of wanted to clarify about this issue of nonverbal cues and how we kind of perceive people as a result of them. Is it really just specific to posture and gender, and posture and hand gestures, or are there other nonverbal cues that women can kind of like create that make other people perceive them in a different way? Or have you researched anything in your gender studies and social psychology research that women might unintentionally do that kind of create preconceived notions of the kind of people that they are?
Yeah, so I think one that I come across in the research that's super interesting to me is touch. Um, and just like the how the difference of it is perceived with each gender. So like if if a male touches a woman, it is seen as like not, it's not supposed to be taken basically like in an intimate way. And if a female touches a man, it is automatically seen as something that's intimate. And yeah, so and then but like if it's a male touch, it's like no, like it's just this person is powerful and they are dominant. And so yeah, the difference in that is really interesting. And that is one thing that I think that, yeah, it's not something that we, when a woman touches, like, it's so interesting how it is perceived so differently, and how it is taken so differently. And it's probably, it goes back to like just history and women being seen in a place of power is not something that is traditionally, historically usual. Um, and so, yeah, I'd say like that's the biggest one I've seen in research and something that I find very interesting.
Right. And I think, what's so fascinating about this is that our understanding of women and, masculizing themselves through their postures or hand gestures these same ideals can like very much not be shared in other parts of the world where societies are more matriarchal or women hold the more powerful roles in society, where like
Mhm.
it seems like our obsession with, making sure that women act ladylike or in a specific way is just something that really is kind of specific to our culture understanding of women's role in society. And I feel like if that role were to change, then how we perceive these like gestures or postures would also change. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you think that that might be wrong?
Um, yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. That's actually, yeah, I would love to think about that more. But yeah, it is, you bring up like different areas, different places in the world and how it does shape so much of, especially here, how we perceive things. Yeah, it's a really great question. I'd love to think about it more.
Of course, of course. So I guess another aspect that is somewhat integral to gender studies is studying the ways in which women have to be in some way submissive or docile, or at least society perceives them to need to be that way. What are other attributes that are associated with women? You can also elaborate on this idea of women having to be docile, of course. And
Mhm.
why has society picked these specific attributes, or why have we kind of decided to stick with them and like not change them over so many years, even as women have kind of outgrown this role as like the housewife?
Yeah. So I always think about like women and like research pointing to like women being communal. And so very much focusing on like family and, being kind, not assertive, not dominant, not aggressive. Um, so yeah, I think that, can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah, why have society decided on like sticking with these specific attributes, and why haven't they changed to reflect women leaving this role as like a housewife?
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because we have seen such, I feel like a shift, in great progress with more women getting into leadership roles, in just all various number of fields. But yeah, I think that historically it was these traits that were assigned to women, they kept them kind of in this box of being a homemaker, housewife, not getting involved in politics, not working. Um, so yeah, and the shift, it is interesting because again, like we look at, I would say like society right now, and there is so many advances women are making in like work and just their work life, and then also even just like in the political arena. Um, but yeah, changing over time. It's an interesting, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on it? That's like very,
Yeah, I think, well, I'm of the opinion that once stereotypes are set, they're nearly impossible to rid someone of them. And I think this is not necessarily like a dig on like a person's ability to change, but rather that just like this idea of women needing to be a provider and this like consistent, and especially in the terms of like emotional support, because I feel like that is where they're expected most to do like mothering and nurturing, kind of contributes to how they have been out of these spheres of influence. And even if there may have been a shift in history, especially recently, I think it is simply just too soon to change how the society in general perceives the role of women. And I think that it's something that happens like intergenerationally, right? Like a great grandparent of yours will probably view women in a different way than like their, great grandchild. And I think through those times, those ideas or the emphasis to those values may have diluted, but I think as like a general culture and as a general society, it's going to take a couple more, decades to not even like fully unlearn it, but just get to a point where it's not so concrete and so like
mhm,
imposed on women to these levels. And I think that it just speaks to why social psychology is so important, because it seems that humans like patterns and they like having associating people with things or people with ideas because it makes it easier for the brain to kind of comprehend those concepts. And I think it's really interesting to see how, strong we kind of hold on to them. especially whenever a reality may not reflect our perception of it. So I think that's something that definitely could very well be an entirely different episode. So we're not going to get into that specific nuance at the moment. But yeah, I think it's very interesting that that is kind of how we decided to stick with these stereotypes. Speaking of these shifts, recently, I think we've most importantly seen the shift in leadership roles. CEOs, politicians are now, becoming women more and more and more. And this has been studied for psychologists by psychologists for a long time. In your work with gender studies or in your work with social psychology, what are some common tropes or attributes that these women in leadership roles share? And are there any notable patterns?
Yeah, so I would say that, and like I think about even just like the posture, because we were just talking about that, and I did a project for that course that was about women coaches in the NFL and how they perform their gender, and it was very interesting because all of the I did a ton of observation and I watched videos and I looked at images, and they all took on masculine standing and seated postures. And of course, like a limitation there is like, it is like the realm of coaching. So it would be a field that is more dominant and kind of have to show some power there. But yeah, so interesting little side note there. But yeah, I would say like in the leadership roles, my research background is in coaching, sports coaching, athletic coaching. I'm really interested in issues of gender, race, and sexuality among women in sport. And so I would say a lot of the common attributes we see with these women in these high level like sports positions is they usually do take on more traits that are associated with males. So more powerful, more dominant, more assertive. And yeah, so I think it's an interesting, and I'm super interested in this field. Again, we could probably have another podcast episode just to talk about that topic. But yeah, I would say like a lot of these traits that are ascribed to women in these leadership positions, they are traits that we see that are more masculine. Yeah.
Right. And I think that is really interesting because it seems that women who do end up making it to these leadership roles end up reflecting masculine ways of like carrying themselves, whereas women who may be more, softer or not as, assertive, we don't see them as much in these leadership roles. So I wonder if even just the existence and influence of men holding these roles have kind of limited which women can now access them because they kind of have to fit within these specific kind of personality types, or else they're just not really considered. And obviously that goes to some extent because if you're too assertive as a woman, then that also opens up Pandora's box of issues. But I guess playing the middle ground is key here. But I think, though this is obviously a little bit, sad to think about that women have to play this middle ground that is like kind of perfectly right in between and hit that sweet spot. I think social psychology itself has also had that same issue and problematic histories with the narratives and how it has forwarded what women are like in the past. I think psychologists like Erickson, for example, made sweeping claims about women that stemmed from a man's perspective of how they acted and not really like empirical data. And I'm wondering how we can deconstruct some of these negative or inaccurate perceptions of women, not even within the field of social psychology, because I think that is definitely a conversation to be had, but also just in general society.
Yeah, so I think like more research always. I feel like that's always the answer. But no, I think that also making research that is more understandable for like the general population. One of my goals with any research that I do is to make it super digestible for any reader, whether that be through like graphics or podcasts like this. I think it's, especially in the world of women and gender studies and psychology, if you don't have like a strong background in it, I feel like especially women and gender studies, it can get a little bit complex. And so yeah, I think just making research more accessible, more understandable. So just more people can obviously read it and get access to it and really understand it. And I think like that's an amazing way we can break down some of these just negative just things we have going, like stereotypes, things that we have going that really just run through society.
Right. And I think that oftentimes humans may not be aware of their own biases because they're just so ingrained within them. And I think that research has been helped me understand how I may have attributed some of these biases I have about other women, myself, or men. And I think just even just conscious awareness of the fact that you're doing it goes a very long way. And I think you're definitely right that research is super, super important. Um, I would like to transition now into your actual research you're currently doing with Harvard. I think a lot of the work that we do focuses on the intersections of sports and gender, specifically in high school coaching, which is, I think, the focus of what we're looking at now. And I would really love to discuss some of these nuances with you, since there is so much within our research and so many facets of them. What are the consistent correlations you have seen in between gender and high school coaches, especially with our data collection or even just in your general research of this field of sports psychology, gender, and sport?
Yeah, so to give listeners a bit of a background on this project, I was trying to put together some sort of like data set that looked at high school coaches, specifically in terms of gender and race, and then also collegiate coaches and like in terms of gender and race as well. And the NCAA has great data available for that for those topics, but high school is something that I thought would be available, but through a ton of emailing different organizations and a ton of research, I realized that doesn't seem like it's something that is available. So it's very, from what I've learned, it's very state dependent. How much information each state provides is usually on each state's like interscholastic league website. So basically, this past summer, Leah and everyone else in our sports attributions group has been helping put together this data set that covers, and we are right now on Rhode Island. So it covers all high schools in Rhode Island, and we collect data about athletes and also coaches. And so we are almost done with it. Yay. It's been a long process. But one thing I've noticed, to answer the question, one thing I've noticed is there's definitely more male coaches overall. There's less women coaching male sports teams, which I feel like is to be expected. But yeah, I would say like those are the biggest ones. And I mean, probably like expected just with like the nature of it. And so, yeah, definitely there is, so far I see, looking through all our Excel spreadsheets, I see an underrepresentation of women in high school sports coaching in both head and assistant positions. And yeah, no matter if it's a boy or a girl team, it's usually a male coach, most likely coaching the team.
Right. And I think that is super interesting because even within this idea of like there's a majority of male coaches versus female coaches, even the kind of sport that the athlete plays determines what kind of coach is most likely to coach them. For example, for volleyball, I think we've seen most coaches be female, whereas football, most coaches are male. So it seems like even the sport itself, let alone the gender of the athletes, is either a masculine sport or a feminine sport, even if it's co-ed and both genders are known to play it. So I wonder if you could maybe speak on some other interesting little tidbits about how gender influences sports so heavily.
Yeah, it's something I'm really interested in, being that my background, I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach for the NFL. So that was like, I was so into that. And it's definitely a male-dominated field, no pun intended. And so, yeah, I think that with this data set, we see, yeah, there is a lot of gendering of sports, like we talk about, and even something that, I mean, going off topic here a little bit, I'm really interested in like the racialization of sports as well. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to collect that data because it's just not available. There's no like, ethnicity box or race box, or there's no like picture of the coach. And so, yeah, I think that again, it's like there is usually these like more feminine sports that we would think of, sports that are, how I like to think of it is like sports that are more aesthetically, I guess, pleasing. So like dance or cheer or gymnastics, those are more likely to be categorized as feminine sports. So you could probably think of like a female coach most likely coaching that sport. And that's usually what we see in the data. And then sports that are more like heavier on like close contact, physical contact, wrestling, football, those are more likely to be masculine and coached by a man. So
Right. And I think that is obviously super intriguing and something that I also think is very interesting just within the research you have done concerning social psychology and sport is the way that oftentimes these same attributes we talked about earlier to be attributed to women in leadership positions versus men in leadership positions also seems to reflect across this field of sports, where if a man is, considered to be successful, he's also considered to be a he, and two assertive and like putting his foot down, things like that. Whereas female coaches seem to be more successful if they are perceived to be successful, it seemed to be in a way through emotional contact with the athlete, whether it be like a nurturing, characteristic just that is shared within the team. And I feel like that is also kind of intriguing how it doesn't really matter what the field is, but these kind of, social ways of understanding gender kind of just trespass all of them and just encompass all of them. But yeah, I think this is super fascinating. And is there anything else you wanted to share about your data collection or maybe even just like upcoming experiments you've planned, anything that interests you?
Yeah. So this entire like research project has been so fun, and I feel like we have so many upcoming fun things that we've been working on. We're actually in the process of working on a study right now, and kind of a study that tries to see people's perceptions of how they think of a sports coach. And so we're basically giving them like a little vignette and seeing who they imagine. And of course, like the vignette will have to do with like a sports like story or like, like a newspaper kind of clipping from a game. And so, yeah, I feel like, not to get ahead of myself, but my thoughts towards it, I'm sure we'll see participants responding that it's probably like, I mean, depending on sport, because again, we see the gendering of sports and also like racialization of sports, but I would assume it'd probably be a white male, since that's what a lot of research before has pointed to, especially when you think of just like when you ask someone to imagine someone, it's usually a white man, and especially in like a leadership position. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And that's an upcoming thing we're working on. And yeah, I think like just my goal is really, the data thing is a huge thing right now for me. And I can't wait for, hopefully, I would love for all states to be required to collect the high school coaching data, because it is a process. Leah can attest, it's not easy. So
Not at all. Perfect. Okay. It's been super good chatting with you about the research. And I think just to kind of tie this all up in a nice neat bow, in your opinion, what is the intersection between gender and psychology and gender studies and or I suppose, why is that intersection so important? And why is it so important that we have a analysis of gender while we kind of examine social psychology and its influence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just like for me personally, I think this research is so important, especially in helping fix the underrepresentation of women coaches in these male dominated fields. I think the more we know about these women and the more we can learn about how other people perceive women working in these high level sports positions, um, the more we can help women obtain these goals that they have to get to these high level positions within professional sports organizations that are traditionally male dominated. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest one, but I think like for me, but I would say like overall for just like a general one, I think a lot of the stuff we talked about here today, I think that this field, obviously we see like in posture, how much it impacts individuals' perceptions about people, and also gestures. I think this is such an interesting field and an area to study and look at. And I think as more people know about it, hopefully it we can help each other. I guess that's very general, but yeah.
Perfect. If you had something or some piece of advice you would give for a high school student that is interested in studying the intersection of gender studies and social psychology, or if some passion was sparked by listening to us have this podcast today, what piece of advice would you give them? Or maybe what things would you tell them to make sure that they remember throughout their process of research and, studying social psychology and its nuances?
Yeah. There's a lot. I think that could be another podcast. But yeah, I think like the main thing, especially with getting into research, it can be, I think, frightening for some people. I feel like I talk to a lot of people and it is like a process that can be like anxiety provoking. But I would say that, I mean, in my experience, everyone like I want it like wants to help you. Everyone wants to help you. And yeah, I think that and don't be afraid to ask for help too. That's a big one. I think that it's yeah, it's such a collaborative field, a collaborative way like area to go into. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to ask for help. Um, and with your research interest, I would just say follow, like, so cheesy, but follow your passion. And if it's yeah, and it can be in the simplest thing. My research like interest really was like a whole like little line of things that like a domino effect kind of thing that fell into place. I had an eating disorder when I was younger, and I found weightlifting, and weightlifting was something that made me feel really strong and powerful. And of course, I wanted to pursue a career in it. So I decided to become a strength. I wanted to become a strength and conditioning coach, especially in like a male, like a high level sports organization. Yeah, so I followed like that, and through that I found like there was an underrepresentation of women and like the type of jobs I kind of wanted to go into. And that's where I found like my interest in like women and coaching and gender studies. So yeah, I would say like even if it's just like a little like it could be anything really. And I would say, yeah, follow your passion. And yeah.
You. Thank you so much for coming with us and chatting with me, Rachel. We're super appreciative of you taking the time to help other high schoolers get an idea of social psychology and gender studies. If you want to say any last words before we end it off for today.
No, I don't. Not, I would just say thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I hope that everyone listening follows their research goals. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. Um, Thank you guys for listening to our first ever episode of Psychology Made Easy Peasy. We are super happy to come back next week with another episode, so be on the lookout for that. And Rachel, thank you for your time. Leah is going to be signing off now, but we appreciate you sitting down with us. Bye, guys.